श्रीमद्रङ्गशठारिसंयमिवराल्लब्धागमान्तद्वयम् श्रीमद्वीररघुत्वहात्यषडजित्पादारविन्दाश्रयम् श्रीमद्वेदवतं सदेशिकेयतेः कारुण्यवीक्षास्पदम् सेवे रङ्गधुरेण शासनवशं नारायणं योगिनं वेदान्तदेशिकेतीशकटाक्षलब्धत्रय्यन्तसारम् अनवद्यगुणं बुधाग्रिं नारायणाद्य यतिधुर्यकृपाभिषिक्तं श्रीरङ्गनाथयतिशेखरमाश्रयामः. Welcome everyone to yet another session of Sri Ahobila Mutt's weekly storytelling. My slides seem to be moving ahead of me, but thank you once again for making the time. Today we are going to talk about two stories. As you see on the screen here, we're going to talk about the story of Raikva and the story of Jatabharathar. Okay, the two stories are not interrelated stories. The stories don't have anything to do with each other in terms of which characters appear in the stories and so on. But we are going to talk about them together because they, in a way, they tell us something similar. Okay, so there is a common thread that goes through both of these stories, and we will think about them to see whether we're able to see the common thread, what your thoughts on the stories are, and so on. Okay, so we'll discuss the stories, and what I would love to see is what your reactions to the stories are. Okay, so the stories are about to start, but like we do always, we talk about this week's birthdays, right? This has been an important week. We know of at least one important birthday this week. But before I start, so let's take a count of people here. How many important birthdays do you think happened this week? One. Okay. There's some people who are saying one. Is anybody saying more than one? Three? Okay, who said three? Raghav, you said three? Oh, okay, so can you tell me? Okay, that's the right answer. But can you tell us who the three birthdays are?
Krishna.
Okay, one birthday is an easy one.
Krishna.
Okay, Krishna, very good. Okay. Taya?
Periyavacham Pillai and Kumada Varadacharya.
Excellent. Okay, who was that? Sorry, I didn't see who said that.
Samstita.
Okay, Samstita, excellent, ma'am. Okay, very good. Okay, so of course our own dear Krishna's birthday was this week. We celebrated it as Sri Jayanti in all our homes. But there are two other birthdays, and so Krishna's birthday. Usually what month and what star does it occur in? Excellent. Avani Masam and Rohini Nakshatra, right? Rohini Nakshatra was Perumal's birth star. Okay. So the interesting thing is the other two birthdays or the other two Tirunakshtrams we celebrated this week, they also happened on the same month and star. So they're also Avani Masam and Rohini Nakshatram. The first of those two was Swami Periyavachan Pillai, and the second was Sri Kumara Varadacharya. Okay, so how many of you know who was Swami Periyavachan Pillai? Anyone who knows who was Swami Periyavachan Pillai? So, for instance, who was Periyavachan Pillai's Acharya? Anyone knows who Periyavachan Pillai's Acharya was? Sorry. Okay, so Periyavachan Pillai, why is Periyavachan Pillai important? Why should we always remember Swami Periyavachan Pillai? It is because Periyavachan Pillai is known as Vyakhyana Chakravarti. Okay, what does Vyakhyana Chakravarti mean? Does anyone know the meaning of the word Vyakhyanam? What does Vyakhyanam mean?
Commentary.
Excellent. Okay, commentary. Okay, so he's called Vyakhyana Chakravarti. Means he's the king of commentaries, right? What did he commentate upon, or what did he comment on?
Divya Prabandham.
Yes, so he wrote commentaries for every one of the 4,000 verses of the Divya Prabandhams. He wrote the commentary for some important verses in the Srimad Ramayanam. If it was not for Perivachan Pillai, we would not know the true inner meaning of the thoughts of Alvars.
Also, a few part
Yes.
a few part of Thiruvaimuri was missing somehow, and then Manabala Mamuni wrote that.
So we're talking about the commentaries written by Perivachan Pillai. Okay, so he wrote the commentary for all the verses. Okay, so the interesting thing about Perivachan Pillai, obviously we said his birth star was Avani Masam Rohini Nakshatra, right? So his birth star is the same day as Perumal, right? His Acharyan, Sri Nampillai, his birth star was, does anybody know what the birth star of Nampillai was? You might have learned this in your Sam Sri Vaishnavism classes. Okay, I'll tell you, his birth star was Kartigayil Kartige. Okay, Kartiga Masam, Kartiga Nakshatra. Okay, so his Acharyan was born on Kartiga Masam, Kartiga Nakshatram, and he was born on Avani Masam, Rohini Nakshatram. Who else has a birth star of Kartigayil Kartige? Kaliyan, right? Excellent. Thirumangi Kaliyan has a birth star of Kartigayil Kartige. So the story goes, the Aithihyam goes that when Thirumangi Alvar in his own time, when he was singing the Perithirumangi verses in praise of the Perumal of Thirukkannamangai. Thirukkannamangai is a town in Tanjavur, okay, in the Tanjavur district. There is a Perumal there, and when he was singing the verses in Thirukkannamangai, the story goes that the Perumal of Thirukkannamangai himself wanted to learn the meaning of those verses from Kaliyan. And what Kaliyan said was, look, I'm not going to teach you now, but there will come a time when I will teach you the meaning of all these verses. So he says that in the Periyathamari, he says that, Meimmei sollil, when Shangamundrendiya kanna, Nintanakkum kurippagil, Karkalam kaviyin poruldane. He says, okay, if you are smart, you will make sure that you will take another opportunity and come and learn from me the meaning of the verses that I have sung about you. Okay, so the story, the Aithihyam is that Kaliyan Thirumangi Alvar himself was reborn as Swami Nampillai, and his Sishya Perumal himself was born in the form of Perivachan Pillai and learned the meaning of all the Divya Prabandhams from Kaliyan. Okay, so that is why when Perivachan Pillai writes a commentary for the Divya Prabandhams, we know it is authentic because it has come from Alvars themselves in the form of his Acharya Nampillai. He learned things from his Acharya Nampillai and wrote it down as books for us to read. So, in fact, in the Taniyan of Perivachan Pillai, it says yes, that if we learn the words of Perivachan Pillai, it becomes a lot easier to reach the feet of Perumal. Okay, so Perumal will always be happy with us if we read the verses of the works of Perivachan Pillai. So that's an important Tirunakshotram that we saw earlier this week. The other Tirunakshotram was Kumara Varadacharya. This is the person on the right hand side here, next to Swami Deshigan. Kumara Varadacharya was, you all know, right? So who was Kumara Varadacharya?
Vedanta Deskar's mama.
No, son, it's son.
Vedanta Deshigan's son. That's right. So Vedanta Swami Deshigan's son, Kumara Varadacharya, and he is called Kumara Varadacharya also. The name that Swami Deshigan gave him was...
He wrote Sriman Venkatanatharya.
Sorry?
He wrote a Daniyan for Swami Desikan.
Well, did he write a Daniyan or did he write the Swami Deshikan's Mangalam?
Mangalam.
Yes, he wrote the Mangalam. He wrote the
He
Mangalam.
also wrote Pillai and Dadi.
He wrote Pillaiyandadi as well. And his name was called Kumara Varadacharya because he was Swami Desikan's son. So the name that Swami Desikan gave him was Varadacharya. And the title Kumara was because he was the son of one of the greatest acharyas we have ever had. Okay. What is the other name that Kumara Varadacharya has? There's one more name that Kumara Varadacharya has, right? Right? His name is Nayanar Acharya. Right? It's called Nayanar Acharya also because they say that Kumara Varadacharya was instrumental in spreading the Sri Vaishnava Sampradayam in the Telugu speaking parts of the country. And he was called Nayanar Acharya as a mark of, again, Kumara. He is the son of Swami Desikan. So he also got the name of Nayanar Acharya. In his own right, Kumara Varadacharya was a great stalwart. He wrote a lot of books, and most importantly, he wrote Swami Desikan's Mangalam. He wrote the Pillaiyandadi, and when we read the Pillaiyandadi, we truly get a sense of the kind of person Swami Desikan was, the kind of bhakti all his sishyas, including Kumara Varadacharya, had for Swami Desikan. In every verse of the Pillaiyandadi, he tells us so much about the bhakti that his sishyas would have for him and the greatness of Swami Desikan. So it's a standing reminder that we recite every day to tell us about the greatness of Swami Desikan. Okay, so this week was a very interesting week where we had the celebration of Sri Jayanti. Not just that, but also we should always remember, along with Sri Jayanti comes the Trinakshatram of these two great acharyas. We should remember those two acharyas as well. Okay. All right. So now coming to today's story. The first story is the story of Raikva, I said. Okay. So there is the story has one more important character who was Janashruti and Raikva. There are the two main people in the story. And like always, we should know where the story comes from, right? Where does the story come from? The story comes from the Chandogya Upanishad. The Upanishads are very, very important because they tell us how to understand Perumal. They tell us the relationship between us and Perumal. The Vedas, I think we have discussed this before in this class on other occasions. The Vedas tell us a lot of things about how to live our lives, what are the karmas we should do and everything. But it is the end of the Vedas, the Upanishads, which are the culmination of all that knowledge. The Upanishads tell us how to understand Perumal. So if it was not for the Upanishads, we really will not have a good understanding of Perumal, because we don't see Perumal directly, right? We don't get to, most of us don't get to see Perumal directly. The only way we can understand Perumal is through the Upanishads, and Chandogya Upanishad is in fact one of the most important Upanishads. All the acharyas have picked up lines from the Chandogya Upanishad, parts of the Chandogya Upanishad, and held that up as the way to truly understand the nature of who we are, who Perumal is, and so on. So the story comes from the Chandogya Upanishad. That is something that we should all be aware of, and it comes from a very important place in all of the body of knowledge that we work with. Okay. So as usual, who are the characters, the main characters who show up in the story? There is, of course, the two characters who appear in the title. There is Janashruti and this person called Raikva. Okay, there are these two people. Along with them, there was this minister of Janashruti. Janashruti was a king. There is this minister of Janashruti called Kshatta, and that's the guy in the picture in the middle, or someone who looked like that must have been Kshatta. And there were some Maharshis who took the form of a couple of swans. They also play a very important role, a small role, but a very important role in the story. And we also see Janashruti's daughter coming towards the end of the story, playing a role there as well. Okay, so those are the main characters. The important ones are Janashruti and Raikva, but there is Kshatta, there are these Maharishis, and the daughter of Janashruti. Okay, so those are the main characters. So what is the story? Janashruti was a king. Okay, and the Chandogya Upanishad tells us that this king Janashruti was no ordinary king. He was a very knowledgeable king. He spent a lot of time trying to understand everything around him. In fact, the Chandogya Upanishad even says he was so knowledgeable that he could even communicate with birds and animals and all those things. So he had that much of knowledge. He was also a king who was very rich, obviously, and he spent a lot of his money doing charity. So he gave a lot of gifts and presents to people around him. He was the patron of a lot of scholars, and he himself learned a lot from all those scholars. Okay, so Janashruti was a very good king. He was by no means a bad king. The one thing that was Janashruti's failing, or a drawback in Janashruti, was that he thought that, oh, look, I know all these things. I'm a patron of so many knowledgeable people. I'm so wealthy, and anybody who asks me for anything, I'm able to give them what they want. Then I must truly be a good person. I must truly be great. So he, rather than being humble, Janashruti thought that he was a great guy. Okay, so he had all these good qualities, but he thought he didn't need to know anything more. He thought he had all these scholars who he was patronizing. They would teach him what he wanted. He thought he had fully understood what he had to understand. Okay, but there was these rishis who lived in his kingdom who really liked Janashruti. They thought that he had a good amount of knowledge. He was a good guy, but the fact that he thought he did not need to learn anymore, the fact that he thought that he did not need to understand anything more about the universe, about Perumal, about himself, they felt that he needed to be corrected. Okay, so these rishis, much like all our acharyas do to us, these rishis said, you know what, we need to bring him back to the right path. Okay, so that's what these rishis thought. So one day what happened was, it was a summer evening. Janashruti was lying on his balcony trying to fall asleep. He was sleeping in the moonlight, or trying to sleep in the moonlight, and he was enjoying the cool breeze of the moonlit night. So what these rishis decided was, okay, this is the right time to grab Janashruti's attention. So what they did was, they took on the form of two swans, and they flew on top of his balcony. So Janashruti was lying facing the moon, and thinking about how great a person he is, and these swans were flying. Okay, so these two rishis decided how to grab his attention, right? So one swan was flying behind the other swan. Okay, so the swan that is flying behind called out to the swan in front of him and said, you know what, you got to be careful. And so they were not talking to Janashruti, they were talking to each other, but they wanted Janashruti to listen to this conversation. So the swan in the back said to the swan in the front, hey, you better be careful. So the swan in the front said, why should I be careful? So the one in the back said, look, you're flying above the great king Janashruti. He's one of the greatest people around us. He knows everything that there is to know. He has so much tejas, and he is so well versed in everything that his tejas might burn you. So if you don't fly carefully, and if you fly just on top of him, his tejas is so strong that it might burn you. So be careful and fly away from the path of Janashruti. Janashruti is listening to all this and thinking, see, even these swans think so well of me. So the swan in the front turns around to the other swan and says, what nonsense, that doesn't matter to me. This Janashruti's tejas cannot burn me. What does Janashruti know? Is he not, if I was flying above Raikva, who pulls a bullock cart, if I was flying above that Raikva, then I have to be careful. His tejas can burn me, but this Janashruti's tejas cannot burn me. He's just an ordinary king. And then they flew away. They just said they had this conversation, and the two birds flew away. Janashruti suddenly woke up with a start. He said, what is going on here? I thought I know so much. I thought I have all this knowledge. These two swans, and it's not even some two human beings. These two swans, and I said it before, right? He could understand the language of the birds and the beasts. So that's why he was able to understand that these two swans have belittled me. They have made fun of me and flown away. who is this Raikva? And they're saying this Raikva pulls a bullock cart. I'm such a great king. They are telling me that this driver of the bullock cart is better than me. I need to find out who this guy is. Okay, so he woke up with a start, and immediately he summoned his minister Kshatta and said, go around the country looking for this person Raikva. Kshatta said, okay, give me the address, I will go look for him. I don't have any address. These two swans came and told me. I was lying on the balcony. Two swans were talking. One swan said to the other swan about Raikva. Now go find Raikva. Kshatta must have been thinking this guy has gone really nuts. He's saying swans were talking. They asking me to go and find a person whose address I don't know. But it was the order of the king, right? So Kshatta went and looked far and wide in the kingdom, asking anybody who he could find, do you know Raikva? Nobody knew Raikva. He went from village to village asking who is Raikva, because Janashruti told him that, look, this guy Raikva, apparently he knows a lot more than I do. He knows the truth of the universe. He knows the true meaning of who Perumal is. I want to learn about him. So the Kshatta thought that when he goes somewhere, Raikva will be a big guru. He will have a lot of following. He will be an important man. Anywhere I go, I will ask for Raikva and I will know. But Kshatta was in for a surprise. Anywhere he went, seems like not only he did not have the address of Raikva, nobody knew who Raikva was. After searching for many days, he went to one village and he found a old bullock cart lying in the corner, and there was a guy sitting under that bullock cart who had some rashes on his body, and he was scratching those rashes and sitting under the bullock cart. He obviously, Kshatta thought, I am looking for a big guru. So he did not know who that person was. He said, do you know where I can find Raikva? The guy looked up and said, what Raikva? Who are you looking for? He said, I'm looking for Raikva. He said, I am that Raikva. So Kshatta was totally taken aback. He found him sitting under a broken bullock cart, an old bullock cart, and not looking like a big jnani. He looked like somebody who was just, who has just done his day of work. He has some time, and he's just sitting under his bullock cart and whiling away the time. So he said, look, my king wants to see you. You have to come. Raikva said, I cannot come anywhere. I have my bullock cart pulling to do. I have to stay here. I cannot come. So then Kshatta went back to the king and said, oh, finally, after days and days of looking for him, I have found this Raikva. So, but I asked him to come, but he is not willing to come. Janashruti then said, okay, maybe he wants something to compensate him. So he sent him some 500-600 cows. He sent him a golden chariot. He sent him a lot of money and said, okay, pass this on to him. Tell him that I'm giving him all these gifts. Then you can bring him back with those gifts. Kshatta went back and said, okay, these are the gifts that my king has given you. Please come. Raikva got extremely angry. He said, I'm not for sale. I cannot come because you gave me all these things. I'm content in my life. If your king wants to learn something from me, let him come and let him come to me, and I will then see if I want to teach him. Then he went back, and this time Janashruti said, Kshatta went back, and this time Janashruti said, okay, I need to take this seriously. So this time he came with 1,000 cows, several golden chariots, lot more gifts. And then he said, I have come myself, and please accept all these things. And Raikva got even more angry. He said, look, if you think that I was waiting to get a bigger price for the knowledge I can give you, then you're totally mistaken. I'm not going to give you anything. So that's when Janashruti realized that having all this wealth, having all this being patronage of all these scholars that he had around himself, that was not the key to understanding Perumal. He needed humility. He needed to go and seek the feet of a guru in the way that he should seek the feet of a guru. So he kept persisting. He kept asking Raikva, saying, okay, if you don't want any of these things, please take me as your disciple. I want to learn a lot from you. So finally, Raikva got impressed with Janashruti, not because of his wealth. Raikva got impressed with Janashruti because of his persistence, because of the fact that he persevered and showed that he was eager to learn the Brahma Vidya. Brahma Vidya is the knowledge of Perumal. The Shastras say that we can learn a whole number of things. We can be scholars in a variety of fields. But the only knowledge that matters ultimately is the knowledge of Perumal. Okay, that the knowledge of, I think we talked about this before, the knowledge of Perumal is the only thing that can be called as jnanam. Jnanam means something that is worth knowing. Everything else is considered to be, the Shastras say, tad jnanam ajnanam atonyaduktam. Learning about Perumal is the only thing that is worthwhile. Everything else we need. I mean, we need to learn all these other things to get by in life, but that cannot be our objective. So Raikva finally realized that this guy is worthy of passing on that knowledge. So all these gifts were set aside. Janashruti gave up his position, or he forgot his position as a king, sought the feet of Raikva, and then Raikva blessed Janashruti with the Brahma Vidya that Janashruti was looking for. That was how Janashruti got knowledge from Raikva. Okay, so Raikva. So there are several things in this story. Okay, we'll talk about what are the main things you find interesting about the story towards the end. But there are several things. I mean, it's a simple story. It's not a complicated one. But the interesting thing about the story is that the teacher Raikva was, for all practical purposes, he was a very unlikely teacher. Janashruti never in his dreams would have thought one day he would go find a bullock cart, find a person sitting under a bullock cart, scratching his rashes, and get the foremost Brahma Vidya from him, right? So the teacher that came to Janashruti ultimately came from a very unlikely place, okay? And also the people who pointed him in that direction, Janashruti does not know that it was two rishis, right? Ultimately, the people who pointed him in that direction, as far as Janashruti was concerned, were two birds. Those two birds were able to understand the difference between Janashruti and Raikva. Okay, so that's the gist of the first story. Okay, so should we go to the second story? All right. Okay, good. The second story is also a very interesting one. Okay, and you will see somehow when we go through the stories, you'll see what the common feature between the story of Janashruti and Raikva was, and the story of Jatabharathar. Okay, the story of Jatabharathar is mentioned in many places, but the core source from which we are going to read the story of Jatabharathar is from Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, a lot of stories of the kind that we are going to talk about are mentioned, and in many cases those stories are mentioned as a way to teach us how to live. These are all stories of people who lived in times past, and they are part of every Purana. Srimad Bhagavatam, as does every Purana, one of the purposes of these Puranas is to tell us about important people, to tell us about people who will teach us how to live. Okay, so Jatabharathar is one of these people, and Srimad Bhagavatam talks about Jatabharathar. Okay, now how many of you have heard the story of Jatabharathar? Jatabharathar's story is slightly more well known than the Janashruti Raikva story. So I'm sure some of you have heard the story of Jatabharathar, right?
I have.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't see who said it, but sorry, who are the two people who said you've heard the story of Jatabharathar?
My name is Aprajita, and I have heard this story before a lot of times.
You've heard the story a lot of times. Do you want to summarize the story for us?
So practically, Jatabharathar was actually a Kshatriya, and so he took 3 birds, and he would do tapas on Perumal, and when he's like really old, he sees this deer, and that deer is crossing a lake, and a tiger comes and it was about to attack it, and it jumps in the middle, and it's pregnant. That deer's pregnant, and so the baby when it gives birth, the baby falls into that river, and Jatabharathar sees this, and he takes that deer and took care of it. And then he
Good.
kept disturbing him in his penances. So when he took his last breath, he became that deer's son. And he, since he did a lot of tapas on Perumal, he was able to remember that he kept doing it, and so he stayed near where he did it, and he kept thinking about Perumal. And then soon that he also died and took another birth, and this time he was a Brahmana, and yeah, and he kept doing tapas on Perumal, but then few days a few like years passed, and then these stealers like Tirudan would come, and they took him and they placed him in a place and they fed him up, and then they were about to offer him to Kali, but you can't offer a Brahmana or a cow to Kali, because it's really both Brahmanas and cows are important to the our sampradayam. And so what happened is Kali comes out and kills those stealer, and then soon Jatabharathar goes back and does his stuff, and then one time they see a king coming and on a palanquin, and they have, it's too heavy, so they see Jatabharathar and they ask Jatabharathar to help them hold, and while he's walking, there's these insects, and so he doesn't want to kill them. It would be a problem if he killed them, and then and then after he walks unevenly, so the king gets angry and asks him why. And so he tells this king about this, and then suddenly he just realized the greatness of Jatabharathar and placed him on the palanquin and went.
Excellent. Very, very good. Very good. Very good. Very good. I could have done a better job than you. Excellent, Aparajit. There was one more of you who said you had heard the story of Jatabharathar, right? Do you want to add anything to what Aparajit has said?
I think I might have also heard it, but like not in this much detail.
Okay, excellent. Very good. Okay, Aparajit did a very good job. So that's so he has summarized the story. What we will do is we'll see the story in actually the reverse order of what Aparajit just told us. But that was a very, very good job. Excellent. Okay, so the story, as I said, is there in the Srimad Bhagavatam. The main characters of the story that we will encounter in the beginning of the story of Jatabharathar. Okay, now we are talking about Jatabharathar, and as Aparajit said, this the person Jatabharathar, we follow his life through several janmas. The janma in which the story with the palanquin, etc., that Aparajit just spoke about, that was the janma in which he was called Jatabharathar. Okay, so the main characters of that part of the story are this Jatabharathar, of course, and there was this king. Okay, this king, his name was Rahugana. Okay, the king Rahugana and Jatabharathar are the main characters of the story. And then there is a flashback within the story, a story within a story that will tell us a little bit more about the greatness of Jatabharathar. Okay, so this person Jatabharathar, actually his name is Bharata. He got the name Jatabharatha because he was like a Jadam. Jadam means something that doesn't have any feeling, doesn't have any reactions, it doesn't react to its environment. Something that doesn't react to its environment is generally referred to, even in Tamil we use the word Jadam, right? Jadam is something that is not an unresponsive thing, is referred to as Jadam. Okay, so he was so focused on his thinking of Perumal, he was so focused on the loftier things, the more important things in life, that to the onlooker, to people around him, he looked as if he was unresponsive. He looked as if he was a Jadam. Okay, so if you slapped him, he wouldn't react. If you shouted at him, he wouldn't react. So that's why he got the title of Jatabharatha. Okay, so he used to spend his life thinking about Perumal, doing what he had to do. They were doing a Nitya Karmanuttanam, thinking of Perumal, continuing with Upasana of Perumal. Upasana means continuously, non-stop, without a break, thinking about Perumal with the view to ultimately reaching Perumal's own feet. Okay, so that's what this Jatabharathar used to do. So what happened one day was, and this is when this interesting incident in his life happened. What happened one day was this king Rahugana. This king Rahugana was not he's not like a major emperor or anything. He was just a small. He was a king of a couple of princely states. Those princely states were called Sindhu, Sauvira. There were two princely states, Sindhu and Sauvira. The king of that, or chieftain or king of that place was this person called Rahugana. This Rahugana was being carried from one place to another in a palanquin. Okay, so as they were going from one place to another, they realized that they needed one more hand. They needed one more person to carry the palanquin. It was not efficient enough for the people who were in that group to carry the king. So they were somewhere midway in their journey from somewhere to somewhere, and they found this person on the side of the street. He found this person. This person he seemed to be lost in thought. He was doing his own thing, but he was sitting there. He looked very, well fed. He looked very strong. He looked like somebody who could do the job. So Rahugana basically said, whoever you are, whatever your name is, just come and join this group to carry the palanquin. Because he was the chieftain of that place. He actually thought of himself like some great emperor. He thought all these people belong to his kingdom, so they should help him. So he called this person, and this person happens to be obviously Jatabharathar, right? So Jatabharathar was pulled into the group of people carrying the palanquin, and they brought him in. And he said, "Okay, yeah, you want me to carry the palanquin? I'll carry it." So he carried the palanquin, but he was, as I said, right, his only focus. There is no break in his thinking about Perumal. Constantly, without any break, he always keeps thinking about Perumal. He keeps enjoying the beauty of Perumal, the qualities of Perumal, and that's all that is anyway going on in his mind. But he was asked to carry this palanquin. So he carried the palanquin, but he was thinking, his thoughts were not on carrying the palanquin. Like if you're focused on the palanquin, then you'll make sure that it doesn't shake a lot, you're going in the same direction. Especially, I don't know how many of you have seen a palanquin, but if any of you has seen a Patna Pravesham of Srimad Aishinga in any of these cities, you will see that it takes a lot of people to carry the palanquin, right? If they are not all carrying the palanquin in the same direction, the palanquin will not go in the same direction. If each person carries the palanquin in a different direction, then the palanquin can't move, right? So this person, Jatabharathar, was one of the people carrying the palanquin, but he was lost in his own thought. Suddenly he would jump up and down. Suddenly he would go in a different direction. Suddenly he would fall down. Suddenly he would move around. Rahugana had got Jatabharathar into the group, but obviously he's inside the palanquin, right? So he cannot see what is going on around. All he could see was that suddenly, ever since this Jatabharathar was brought into the group, he's having a very bumpy ride. It's not going smoothly. So he did not know what was going on. He didn't know if they are going through some bumpy terrain, or it's something going on with the people carrying the palanquin. So he said, "Stop the palanquin. I want to ask what's going on." He asked all the people, why is the ride so bumpy? I don't like this ride. So everybody else said, "Look," because they were all afraid of that chieftain, the king, right? They said, "Please don't blame us. There is nothing wrong with the terrain. This last guy that you brought, he's the one he's the reason for this bumpy ride. He's been going in all directions. Sometimes he jumps up, sometimes he's laughing, sometimes he's crying, he's moving around. So he's the reason the ride is bumpy. It's not us." So Rahugana called him and said, "What's going on? Why are you not focusing on the job? You look like you're somebody who is healthy, who can do the job, who can move around. Why are you not focusing on what I asked you to do?" And he started abusing this person. So Jatabharathar he looked at Rahugana and said, What palanquin? I did not carry any palanquin." So Rahugana got even more angry. I gave you a job. I asked you to carry the palanquin. You're not doing that job correctly. You're not carrying the palanquin well. And now when I ask you, you're saying there is no palanquin. I'm not carrying any palanquin. Who are you talking to? So Jatabharathar responded in this way, and Rahugana got even more angry. He said, look, if you don't answer my questions correctly, I will get very angry, and I'll ask you to be given a few hundred lashes as a punishment. So Jatabharathar said, look, who are you? Who am I? Are you being carried in the palanquin? Am I carrying the palanquin? No. These are all just the body, right? There is an Atma inside the body. There is an Atma inside you. There is an Atma inside me. It is the body that is carrying the palanquin. The Atma is not carrying the palanquin. So when you say you, the person responding is the Atma. It is not the body, right? So he said, if you come to me, you are an Atma. I'm also a very similar but different Atma. You come and tell me that I'm inside a palanquin, and I'm that you are inside a palanquin and that I am carrying you. That makes no sense. It is then that Rahugana realized that the person he is talking to is not some random person lying on the side of the road. He's not some random person who he can bring and ask him to carry a palanquin. He understood that the person that he is talking to is a Brahmajnani. He said, okay, that's the sort of things you are saying are scaring me. He said, look, I have never thought about life in this way. When you explain it to me, it seems to make sense, but it's obviously, right? The body is something that can perish. The body is something that does not on its own have any knowledge. How can that body be responsible for carrying the palanquin well or not? As the Atma is distinct from that body. So when you say these things, it's sensible, but it's scaring. It's quite scary to me because I have never thought in this way. He said, who are you? So Rahugana fell at the feet of Jatabharathar and said, please teach me Brahmajnana. Please teach me the truth of the Upanishads. Why am I needlessly angry with you? You seem to know a lot more than me. And that's when Jatabharathar takes a lot of time and explains to Rahugana about the reality, the real truth of how the Upanishads view the world, how they view Perumal, and so on. So Rahugana, just like Janashruti, right? Janashruti thought that his people who teach him will come only in a certain shape or size. Janashruti did not even realize that this person lying under a bullock cart could be his guru. Similarly, this Rahugana also did not realize that somebody who is carrying a palanquin, who has just been, like any other guy who is in his payroll, he didn't realize that he could be a Brahmajnani, but he realized he could get Brahmajnanam from him. Why was Jatabharathar so knowledgeable? He was just somebody on the side of a street, right? Why was he so knowledgeable? That is the first half of the story that Aparajit told us, and that backstory is an interesting one for us to know. Okay, this in this birth, the birth in which this palanquin incident happened, this person's name was Jatabharathar. But 2 births before this, he was a king called Bharata. Okay, this Bharata is also called, there is a Bharata in every yugam, and this Bharata is also known as the Adi Bharata. He's the first Bharata who was in the line of several Bharatas who happened. So this Bharata was a great king. He was a great king, but he was also very focused on the real things in life, learning the most important thing that he needs to learn. And that most important thing is what? We just saw what is the most important thing to learn, right? Perumal's Jnana. He wanted to learn that. So when he became of a certain age, he said he gave the kingdom, the responsibility to manage the kingdom to his sons, and he went into the forest to think about Perumal, to understand the meaning of the Upanishads, and to expand his knowledge of Brahmajnana. So he started doing this upasana, and it was going very well. One day what happened was, when he had gone to the banks of the river to do his Nityakarmanuttanam, and a pregnant deer came near him. And the pregnant deer, he could see obviously that the deer was pregnant, but the deer was also very, very afraid. It was afraid because it was being chased by a lion. And the lion was somewhere at a distance, So the deer was afraid both for herself and the little baby she was bearing. So in her fear, she delivered the little deer baby and ran away, so that she could protect herself and that somebody will protect the baby. So she, in a way, maybe she saw that this Bharata was near her, and that she could use his protection for her baby, and that she could run away to protect herself. So she delivered the baby and ran away. And Bharata, because he saw the situation in which this baby was born, he somehow, for some reason, he felt a lot of affection towards his baby deer. He felt like he was, God had ordained him to be the mother of that deer. So he started taking care of every little need of that deer, like a little baby. Even though sort of these animals are a lot more self-sufficient when they are born, they need help, right? So Bharata was doing all these things for this deer, and as time went on, his focus shifted from learning more and more about Perumal, and it shifted towards taking better and better care of this deer. So the deer started to absorb all his energy and time, and it became a huge. Started as a little incident, but it completely took over his life over a period of time. So he became just absorbed with being the guardian of that deer. So much so that all his upasana that he was doing, right, of trying to understand Perumal and non-stop thinking about Perumal, that started to wane a bit. He had done a lot of it. He had gained a lot of knowledge. But over a period of time, that started to wane. That started to reduce in focus, and the focus on the deer started to increase. That towards the end of his life, all he could think of, when he was thinking in the beginning, when he was thinking of Perumal, now he could only think of the deer. That's the only thing that was continuing in his mind. Okay, so in the last moments of his life, the only worry he had was, if I die, who's going to take care of this deer? He didn't realize that he's in the forest. The deer is supposed to live in the forest. It can fend for itself. He didn't think of those things. He was worrying about the deer. He breathed his last breath thinking about the deer. So there is a rule that if you're doing upasana, if you're trying to reach Perumal's feet by constantly thinking about him, there is a rule that when you breathe your last breath, when you're done with your upasana, when the whole thing is done, in your last breath, you're supposed to think about Perumal, and that will lead you to release. Now, along the way, if you don't think about what your focus should be, and you think about something else, your next janma or your next birth ends up being in line with what you were thinking about in your last minute of your previous birth, for those people who are doing upasana. So since Bharata was thinking about the deer, his next birth was a deer, right? So he breathed his last breath thinking about that deer, and then he became a deer. But as Aparajit said very rightly, since he had invested his time in learning about Perumal, that investment did not go waste. When he got another birth, when he got his second birth as a deer, he obviously could not. A deer cannot do all that is required of someone who is doing upasana, right? He had to wait. He had to wait for another birth to continue his upasana. His investment did not go waste, and in his third birth, he was born as Jatabharathar. And that Jatabharathar is the one who continued that upasana and ultimately reached the feet of Perumal. Rahugana did not know any of this background information. Rahugana did not know any of this greatness of Jatabharathar. He saw Jatabharathar just as some person lying on the side of the road. And anyway, he ultimately realized all this and learned a lot from Jatabharathar. Okay, so the story of Bharata is an interesting one because of several things. He started thinking about Perumal. That investment was the one thing. Is if you start thinking about Perumal, if you start learning about Perumal, that investment will never go waste. It always stands you in good stead, and you can always come back to it and continue and learn more. But at the same time, because Bharata lost focus, all of that process got delayed a whole lot. Okay, so that's the story of Jatabharathar. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the two stories. We'll discuss what your thoughts are on the two stories, but before we do that, as usual, we have a short quiz. Okay, it may or may not be related to all the topics we've talked about today, but it somehow in some loose sense, it will end up being related. Okay. So first question. We started by talking about Sri Perivachan Pillai, right? And we said Perivachan Pillai's Acharya was Sri Nampillai. Okay. Now, this is a question for all those of you who have been in the Ahobila Sri Vaishnavism classes. You might have heard this before. So, who was the Acharya of Nampillai? Anyone remembers? Yes. Any answers from anyone?
Namjir.
Excellent. Okay, Raghav, good one. Okay, so Acharya of Nampillai was Sri Nanjiyar. Okay, so Nanjiyar's Shishya was Nampillai, and Nampillai's Shishya was Perivachan Pillai, Vadakku Pillai. These were the Shishyas, these were the main Shishyas of Sri Nampillai. Okay, then you have a bonus question. What is who was the Acharya of Nanjiyar? Okay, that's relative to the answer of Nanjiyar. This is slightly easier.
Parasara Bhattar.
Parasara Bhattar. Excellent. Okay, very good. So Nanjiyar's Acharyan was Parasara Bhattar. So Bhattar's Shishya Nanjiyar's Shishya was Nampillai. Okay, we have a second bonus question. Do you know what was Nanjiyar's name before he became a sannyasi? Okay, that is not an easy one, but if anyone knows, that's definitely a bonus point for that. Okay, before he became a sannyasi, Nanjiyar's name was Vedanti, and the story of how Nanjiyar became a sannyasi, how Bhattar brought him into the Sri Vaishnavite fold is an interesting one in its own right. Maybe one day we will talk about that. Okay, all right. Next question. On purpose, I sort of left out this piece of information when we were talking about the first story. Does anyone know which Vedam the Chandogya Upanishad features in?
Samaveda.
Excellent. Okay, I partly expected that Raghav was the one who will give the answer, but yes, good. So the Chandogya Upanishad comes in the Samaveda. Okay, as I said before, the Upanishads are the last part of or the culmination of all of the knowledge of the Vedas. Okay, so there are Upanishads in all the Vedas, and some of the Upanishads are important. And Chandogya Upanishad is important also because it appears in the Samavedam, which Perumal himself says that of all the Vedas, I like to take the form of Samavedam. Okay, so it is you can think of the information in the Chandogya Upanishad as something that Perumal himself is communicating with us. Okay, all right. Next question. We talked about Jatabharathar, right? Jatabharathar was someone who he was unresponsive to the world around him. If you told him, if you hit him, he will not respond. There's an Alvar also who spent a lot of his life like that. So who was this?
Who's
Madhura
Okay, Nammalvar. Okay, Nammalvar is the right answer. Some of you said Madhura Kavi Alvar, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what happened between Nammalvar and Madhura Kavi Alvar?
Well, Madhura Kavi Alvar asked him this question, and Nammalvar Nammalvar heard this, and he said an answer, and that's how Nammalvar started speaking.
Okay,
After.
perfect. Okay, that's right. So Madhura Kavi Alvar, who was much older than Nammalvar, came to him, and he found, just like Jatabharathar, Nammalvar was somebody who did not eat, did not speak, did not do anything, but he was 16 years old. People thought that he is okay. He's just some person who's lying under this tree, and almost ignored him. Madhura Kavi Alvar is the one who recognized that he is a big jnani. Okay, so the stories that we see of Janashruti and Raikva, the story of Rahuganan and Jatabharathar, there are similarities of that story in many places. Okay, if you went to the temple in Alvar Tirunagiri back in the day, suppose you were there, you just saw this kid lying there under the tree, and thought, okay, he doesn't know anything, and you thought lightly of that person, you would have been wrong, because that person was the greatest acharya who ever lived, that is Nammarvar, right? So does anyone know what the first conversation between Madhurakavi Alvar and Nammarvar was?
Madhurakavi Alvar asked a question to Nammarvar,
Okay.
saying, and Nammarvar gave like a really good answer.
Right.
And Madhurakavi Alvar was just like awed, and he became Nammarvar's Shishya.
Excellent. Very good. Very good. So the conversation between Nammarvar and Madhurakavi Alvar, in a way, was not that different between the conversation between Rahugana and Jatabharathar. It was about the difference between the body and the soul. That when you look at somebody, you don't see the Atma, but the Atma is the important thing. That was the crux of the conversation. In the case of Rahugana, he was arrogant. In the case of Madhurakavi Alvar, he wanted to take Nammarvar as his acharya. He was following a light, and he came all the way from the north of India to Alvar Tirunagari. He wanted to verify that this is indeed the person that the light was leading him to, right? So Madhurakavi Alvar's questions were similar to Rahugana, but in the topic they were talking about, but the tone of the question, the intention of asking the question was extremely different, and that is why Madhurakavi Alvar became the foremost and the only Shishya of Swami Nammarvar. If it was not for Madhurakavi Alvar, we would not have got all of the Thiruvaimuri, because he is the one. Nammarvar would sing the verses of the Thiruvaimuri for months together. There were 3 instances where for 6 months Nammarvar lay without his consciousness. Madhurakavi Alvar would take care of him. Madhurakavi Alvar would make sure that whatever words came out of Nammarvar got documented. If Madhurakavi Alvar did not document it, Nammarvar was a mystic person, right? He was enjoying Perumal in his own heart. We would not have known all of these things, right? So again, just like the 2 important people we saw today, Nammarvar is yet another reminder of what we want to learn from today's story. Okay, so that's excellent. So before we finish, I just want to discuss with you what are the main things we all together, what are the main things we think we learned today from these stories? Anyone wants to go? I mean, I've talked about the few things that I thought were interesting, but I'd like to know what you thought.
Don't have a fixed mindset, because if you have a fixed mindset, you think and you don't want to learn more.
Good. Okay. Excellent. Sorry, who was that?
It
I have
was
some-
Aparajita.
Okay, Aparajita. Okay, excellent. Okay, anyone else?
And
only
You shouldn't think bad of everyone or low of anyone.
Excellent. Okay, very good. Very good. That's good.
true
Under-
knowledge is only about Perumal.
Good. Okay, Sriman, that's you, right? Yes. Okay.
You should not judge anyone.
You cannot judge anyone. Okay, very good. Excellent. Excellent. Okay.
Judge anything by its external looks.
Don't judge things by their external looks. Very good. Excellent. Good. Good.
You can also say that if you need help, it can come from a variety of places.
That's correct. That's excellent. It can come from anywhere, right? It can come from the most unlikely of places. Good.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay, good.
You shouldn't be arrogant. You should always accept that you have a lot more to learn, and
That's correct.
that Perumal is better than you.
That's right. Dhanashwati thought that he had learned everything. Rahugana was blissfully unaware of what he needed to know. So there's no reason for all of us, right? That we may have learned a little bit, we may know a little bit, but if you compare the amount of knowledge that we know versus the amount of knowledge that we don't know, what we don't know is always going to be more, right? So there is no reason to be arrogant. Excellent. Very good. Okay. So here is what I thought was the main takeaways, which I think you guys have done a much better job than I did of summarizing the main takeaways. First of all, the thing to remember from the story is the Brahmajnanam is the true knowledge of who Perumal is. Okay, the Brahmam is a word that is used to refer to Perumal. Okay, and Brahmajnanam means the knowledge of the Brahman or knowledge of Perumal. That is the true knowledge. And whatever we learn, okay, we should always try, as we grow older, as we get more exposure to things, we should try to focus on learning things that will tell us about the true nature of Perumal. That is why we start when we are young, right? We learn the Vedas, we learn the Arulichels, but as we grow older, we should try to go to Acharyas, try to understand the scriptures, and try to understand what the Upanishads are saying about Perumal. What is the meaning of the word Brahman? What is the relationship between him and us? That should be the focus. As we grow older, we want to, every passing minute, every passing day, we want to get better and better at understanding that. That is the one thing that is important. Okay.
I have another moral
Yep. Sure.
that that really small things can distract you from the important stuff.
Perfect. Okay.
Like that like when he Jadabharata, no, yeah, Jadabharatan in his previous janma, he was like a really good bhakta of Perumal. But there's like this small deer that like no one would have thought would have made a difference, but it made a huge difference in his life.
Excellent.
It like changed, distracted him totally from the right path.
Correct. Exactly. That's
So I think an important thing is that you should always be focused on the important things.
perfect. Good. So that's, in fact, you took the words right out of my mouth. So that you have that third that bullet point on the screen there, that it's important to stay focused. Okay, Brahmajnanam is the true knowledge that we need, and we have to continue to keep focused on it. Sometimes, just like in the case of that King Bharata, sometimes even minor things like the deer can distract us from what should be the right path. So always seek the direction of our acharyas to keep us focused on where we need to go. That's very good, Sriman. Very good. Excellent. Okay. And the last thing is something that you guys have said several times now, which that we could get an opportunity to learn even from the most unlikely source. Okay. So we need to, there are stories in the Srimad Bhagavatam where there is a person called Avadhuta Brahmana who says, who gives, there are several chapters in the Bhagavatam where he describes how he learned very, very important things. How he learned things about Perumal, about the Atma, from everyday things, from what he learned from just by observing the nature of an insect, what he learned from observing the nature of the trees around him, what he learned from the birds around him. So even the smallest thing, if we are focused and if we learn from an acharyan, even the small, from just the seeds that the acharyan sows can be made to grow by almost anything that we see around us. Okay, so never underestimate anyone. We should never brush aside someone as, oh, what can that person know? Because if back in the day, if Madhurakavi Alvar had done that, we would not have gotten a Marva. If we had not gotten a Marva, our Sampradayam does not exist, right? So just remember that these small, identifying an unlikely acharya and seeking their refuge can be the difference between day and night for us. Okay, so that's another important thing to remember. Okay. Okay, so let me pause there. Does anyone else have anything to add? Any other thoughts?
I have a question.
Sure.
So I forgot who is the Sishyan of Nampillai?
Okay, so the Nampillai, the Sishya of Nampillai who we talked about, whose Tirunakshatram it was this week, was Perivachan Pillai, right?
Okay, Perivachan Pillai.
Right, and the other Sishya of Nampillai who we also know about from the Acharya Parampara is who? Nampillai had several Sishyas. There is another Sishya of Nampillai who we know from the Acharya Parampara also.
Vadakattiruvedi Pillai.
Excellent, Vadakattiruvedi Pillai. Good job.
Thank you.
Okay. I have a question.
Sure.
Wait, who? Who is the person we talked about in like the first story? Like the bullet card person?
Raikva.
Okay, Raikva. So how did Raikva get the knowledge of like Perumal?
Good question. So just like Jatabharathar, right? The people who are constantly thinking about Perumal, and those people are doing upasana. Upasana is basically trying to, just like we all to go to Perumal's feet, to go to Sri Vaikuntham, we have employed the upayam of Sharanagati, right? But there are some people back in the day who used to go to this to get the same purpose, who would employ the road of thinking about Perumal all the time, constantly. Okay, so Raikva was one of those people who was thinking about Perumal constantly, and his knowledge was passed on from his previous births. So he came because he was doing upasana before. He, just like Jatabharathar got inherited all the investment he had made in thinking about Perumal from his previous birth, and he was able to continue. Raikva continued from there. So he was an upasaka. He was somebody who was thinking about Perumal, and just his deep thought about Perumal gave him the knowledge.
Okay.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay, excellent. So thank you very much once again for making the time. Kavitarkika Simhaya Kalyana Gunashaline Srimate Venkateshaya Vedanta Gurave Namaha Vadidvipa Shirobhanga Panchanana Parakramaha Sriman Venkatanathari Chirambujetam Bhuvi Sri Ramanuja Siddhanta Nirdharana Dhurandaraha Adivan Chatakopaki Etindro Vajetam Bhuvi Srimate Shivantrova Sri Vedanta Deshiketindra Mahadeshikaya Namaha Srimate Shri Lakshmi Samudivya Paduka Sevaka Shivantragova Sri Narayana Etindra Mahadeshikaya Namaha Srimate Shivantragova Sri Ranganath Etindra Mahadeshikaya Namaha. We have the Ahobila storytelling class again next week, same time at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific next Saturday as well. Thank you, everyone.
Dhanyo Sri Aryan.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.